Okay, hello everybody. It is 4 in the afternoon in Southeast Queensland, Australia, and it is 9 a.m. in Israel, where we have our speaker, Ran Erel, Dr. Ran Erel from the Volcani Center. Before we start with this today's edition of the Australia-Israel Scholar Seminar Series, let me just present an acknowledgement to country, and that is that we acknowledge the Jagra people and the Turrbal people. They're the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here today in Southeast Queensland, Australia. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. We extend that to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today and Indigenous people throughout the globe. Again, it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Ran Erel. It's all yours, Ran. Thank you.
Thank you. So I work on plant nutrition in general, but I'm mostly interested in phosphorus. I think it's a fascinating subject where we have so much things to study, to improve, and I will show you why in general and how we are trying to tackle this very big challenge that is very far from being resolved. So phosphorus is an essential plant nutrient, and it's limiting agrosystem production in most of the world. So you see here the global map, and the red colors or the reddish colors indicate low phosphorus bioavailability, meaning that if we'll grow plants on these soils that are reddish, it will respond to phosphorus. It will give higher yield when phosphorus is applied. So you see most of South America, Africa, India, and also Australia, most of the soils are low in phosphorus, and we have to fertilize to get the production that we wish. So you can see here plants that are grown in natural soils. In this case, it's wheat or lettuce. With and without phosphorus, this is the picture. It repeats in many different soils. And to produce phosphorus fertilizer, the fertilizer companies mine rock phosphate. This is what phosphorus fertilizer are made of. The rock phosphate is very ancient sediment rock that contains high levels of phosphorus. It's mostly bones of ancient animals that settled in ancient oceans. And they extract the phosphorus with strong acid. And this phosphorus is later used for the synthetic fertilizers. But we mine more and more rock phosphate, and rock phosphate is a finite resources. Okay, it's very ancient sediments. It's very much like fossil fuel. We keep extracting it from the soil, and we will have less and less reserves. So this is a prediction published by Dana Cordell long time ago, and you see we mine more and more phosphate rock, and eventually we're going to end up and we start scratching the bottom of this reservoir, and the production will reduce. So you can argue whether it will be in 2037 or 2050, but eventually we won't have this amount of phosphate rock that we need to keep our production system at the highest levels. And another concern is that rock phosphate reserves are, again, very much like fossil fuel, are not equally distributed on the globus. And most reserves are found in Morocco and China. About roughly 70% of the rock phosphate reserves. And that gives us another issue, challenge. Europe, for example, is entirely dependent on import of phosphorus. So, sorry. So what is the issue with P fertilizers? And why is it a challenge? When we apply phosphorus to soil, most soils, it reacts with the soil particle and precipitate or captured or fixed in the soil in forms that is not available for plants to use. So here, this image illustrates this phenomenon. We applied 100 milligram of phosphorus into the soil, and we measure in the y-axis the extractable phosphorus, the phosphorus that is predicted to be available for plants throughout a duration of 50 days. And you see that immediately after application of phosphorus, roughly 20 or 21% of the phosphorus is captured, and the availability decreases with time. After 40 days or so, most of the phosphorus is captured by the soil, and only 40% is available for plants. Now, this is an average of 7 Israeli soils. If we have more alkaline soils, more clay soil, the more calcium carbonate, lime we have, and in Israel, all soils are calcareous, and also South Australia, all soils are calcareous. Then the fixation rate is higher, and you can find 70, 80% of the phosphorus captured in the soil precipitate as calcium phosphate in forms that are not available for plants. So our fertilization efficiency is very, very low. We need to add 5 kilograms of phosphorus, and the plants take only 1. The rest, the 80% of our fertilizer, just remains in the soil. And this is what calls legacy peat. We add a lot of phosphorus, mostly as synthetic fertilizer. The plants uptake some, and most of it just building up in the soil in forms that are not available for plants. Now, if we have too much phosphorus, and we have, for example, runoff of soil particles with very high concentration of phosphorus into natural water bodies, this is where algae are living, and they are also limited by phosphorus. If we add the synthetic fertilizer, the algae start to grow very fast. That's what's called eutrophication. And then the algae consume all the oxygen. Some species can produce toxins that killing the animals in these water bodies. And eutrophication due to phosphorus over-fertilization is a huge problem. So we need to have more sustainable system. And there's a lot of concern. How can we make this thing work better? So there are many approaches. One is breeding plants that can have higher phosphorus uptake efficiency, that can dissolve this legacy peat. But we can have better fertilizers. We can use biofertilizer or to recycle phosphorus. And we can enhance the microbial activity in the soils that can also solubilize this phosphorus. We said most of phosphorus is captured in the soil. We can release it by activation of bacteria and fungi that can dissolve this phosphorus and make it available for plants. Recycling is very important. Again, I cite here Dana Cordell that shows that in human waste, in animal waste, crop residuals, we can recover 30% of our phosphorus needs. Currently, most of it is being dumped and not used. And this is very important. So we have different approaches, and I will show you very, very briefly some of the works that we do here. I'm located in Gilad Rister Center. It's the southern campus of Vulcani, and we work a lot on plant nutrition and phosphorus nutrition. So we work on mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza is a symbiotic fungi that colonized most of the roots. All the crops that are being grown in Israel and elsewhere are this symbiosis with mycorrhiza. The plants give carbon to the fungi, and the fungi deliver phosphorus, just extending the root system. And we can see that peat deficient soils colonization with mycorrhiza is very beneficial. We are trying to recycle phosphorus from different sources and produce new fertilizers, either biofertilizer by recycling wastewater or new innovative fertilizer like polyphosphates. Okay, so I've talked about mycorrhiza. What are polyphosphates? Well, polyphosphate are change of phosphorus units. This is what the plant absorbs. The orthophosphate, PO4. This is the only source of phosphorus that plant absorb. But these units can be condensed to a long or linear or cyclic chain, like in ATP, okay? And this makes the phosphorus act as a slow release phosphorus. So you already saw this figure where we apply the conventional orthophosphate, and it's being captured in the soil, and availability decreases with time. When we use polyphosphate, it cannot react with the soil as quickly. On the contrary, it's being released, degraded very slowly, so the bioavailability increases with time. Now, we think that this can be beneficial in long-term experiment, and we already showed in using wheat as a model plant that we can actually significantly increase biomass when we're feeding polyphosphate versus orthophosphate in calcareous soils. That's important. The more calcium carbonate we have, the better the response to polyphosphate we found. And we repeated it in several, actually, 13 individual experiments where we compare the condensed phosphorus and the orthophosphate. And this is the bottom line. We test here, again, 13 experiments with lettuce, celery, cabbage, and so on, green vegetables. And we see on average an increase. This is orthophosphate is similar to polyphosphate. We see on average 40% increase in yield when we use polyphosphate versus orthophosphate. And we can also see that not all polyphosphates are the same. The short chain and the linear polyphosphate were very responsive, meaning increased the yield, but the cyclic were not that effective. Another approach, as I said, is recovery. We had a collaboration with Ostara. It's a company that takes the phosphorus from wastewater, and wastewater contains quite a lot of phosphorus that currently the practice is to react this phosphorus with iron or aluminum or calcium, and that's how it's being fixed and precipitates in the sludge, and then it's not available for the plant anymore. Instead of intentionally precipitating the phosphorus, they have a reactor that creates struvite. Struvite is a salt that is excellent fertilizer. It's low-release fertilizer. And we tested the struvite versus a conventional fertilizer at 3 levels of compost application using a potato as a model crop. And you can see that for each compost application rate, the struvite has an average increase in yield of about 5 tons per hectare. So this slow release recycled phosphorus is not only recycling, it's also even a better response because it released the phosphorus gradually. Another approach for the same problem, how to extract the phosphorus from wastewater instead of precipitating it in the sludge, we can grow algae. I said that algae can absorb phosphorus very, very efficiently. We grow algae on wastewater, we harvest the algae and use it as biofertilizer. So let's see here, we compared in tomatoes in alkaline soil, the TSP is synthetic fertilizer and algae at the same amount, either 30 or 60 milligram per kilogram. And you can see that the yield is roughly the same. It's even slightly better with the algae, with the same amount of phosphorus applied. we can see that when we adding the algae as source of phosphorus, we have better mycorrhizal activity in the root system, because again, the phosphorus in the algae is not readily available. If I have another couple of minutes, I can present another interesting aspect that is very unique to our dusty little country. We have a lot of dust in Israel. The dust comes mostly from the Sahara in rates that are nearly 200 grams per square meter per year. That's a lot of dust, and you can see it everywhere. And we hypothesize that if dust precipitate on the leaf and it's very rich in phosphorus, dust have 4 or 5 times more phosphorus than soil. So maybe plants can use it. If plants can capture a fly and dissolve it and use the nitrogen as the protein as source of nitrogen, maybe the plants can use dust as source of phosphorus. So we tested it very roughly. We grew lettuce with low availability of phosphorus, and we added dust. We added to the roots, and there is no effect because the phosphorus in the dust is not available as is. We added to the shoot, 4 grams of dust to the shoot, and you can see a tremendous increase in yield. So we tested it in chickpea that is known to be acidifier, chimtza in Hebrew, the acidifier plants. And you can see that when we starve the chickpea to dust, it's very small, to phosphorus, sorry. And when we added dust, the chickpea almost doubled its biomass. So it can release the phosphorus from the dust, responds very well. And now Elnatan Golan, a PhD student in my lab, now found bacteria on the leaves that can dissolve phosphorus. These are PSBs, P-solubilizing bacteria, and grown on substrate with no available phosphorus, only very fixed phosphorus. And this bacteria, this colony was taken from a leaf of pea-starved wheat. So we are trying different approaches to better utilize our phosphorus fertilizers or to recover phosphorus from different waste streams instead of just dumping it to recycle it. And we can see it has huge potential. Of course, price is the limit, but this is the right direction. Again, very much like the utilization of fossil fuel versus green energy. We also want to have green fertilizers like algae, like struvite, and of course to enhance the positive microbial activity in the soil. This is the directions that we are taking, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Ran. I'll clap in the name of the audience and also those in YouTube watching. Does anybody on the call have a question or a thought? So, Ran, I'll start with something. So I'll disclaim I don't know much about agriculture, but I do some statistics that's tangential to that occasionally. So the solutions that you're looking at, algae or bacteria or phosphorus on the leaves, etc. When you analyze them, do you also consider other nutrients similar to phosphorus that are also needed? Because phosphorus seems like a key component, but of course there's probably a mix. So how do you go about that?
Yeah. Well, actually, the key nutrients in most systems is nitrogen, for sure. So if plants do not have enough nitrogen, there will be no response to phosphorus. Phosphorus is mostly secondary. So yes, there is interaction between the availability of other nutrients and phosphorus, and it's always complex. And one of the approaches, and we see it in fruit trees, for example, in olives, where we had a lot of work, when you optimize nitrogen fertilization, you almost solve the issue of phosphorus, because then you have larger root system. that is colonized with mycorrhiza. And the plants can be more efficient in utilizing the little phosphorus there is in the soil. If the plant is stressed, any kind of reason, it can be nitrogen, it can be salinity, then the ability of the plants to acquire phosphorus is lower. Plants invest a lot of energy and carbon in taking up phosphorus. So if there's stress and there's not enough carbon, sugars, photosynthesis, if root system is limited, then phosphorus acquisition efficiency will be very, very low. So you have to take all of this into account. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks. Very clear. Are there other questions or thoughts? So there's one in the chat. I'll maybe read it. So thank you, Omer. So the comment is, so overhead fertilization plus bacteria, mycorrhiza for above ground is the next step?
Well, foliar fertilization is very efficient approach, and that's how you go around the tax that the soil takes, and soil takes very high tax in pea fertilization. It can be anywhere between 20 to 80% of the phosphorus. If I just apply it to the shoot, that's an excellent approach. The problem, well, there are several problems. One is more costly to go and spray phosphorus on the shoot every few weeks. And the amount that we can supply, if you look at the chickpea plant again, is limited. It's not enough in one application, okay? We cannot supply all the requirements to the shoot. So we'll have to repeat it many times throughout the growth of the crop. So it's excellent to fix an immediate problem. It cannot replace the fertilization in the soil. I didn't really understand. Mycorrhiza is found in the roots, not in the leaves. And of course, there's no doubt we need to make sure that it has the optimal condition to work perfect. You see that if we add synthetic fertilizer, we reduce the ability of the mycorrhiza to function. If we add less available sources of phosphorus, like compost, like biofertilizers, like polyphosphates, then mycorrhiza comes to work and start doing what it does best. It's to capture the phosphorus and deliver it to the root.
I have a question. Ran, you showed a number of different options for new types of phosphorus or different ways of applying it. What seems to you to be the most cost-effective solution? And I'm thinking about Australia, that is very large and probably has quite a lot of requirement for its very large agricultural system. Where would you place your bets on the most translatable or cost-effective solution that you have been working on?
Sadly, the most cost-effective approach is using synthetic fertilizers. That it's just too cheap because we don't consider the impact on the environment. We don't consider that it's a depleted resource. We don't consider any of that. We don't take into account the environmental damage that this synthetic fertilizer causes. So currently, it's the cheapest. It's like having electricity from coal. If you don't consider any of that, that's the cheapest alternative, not using windmills and not using other alternatives. But if you consider everything, so yeah, of course, you will want to have more efficient, there's a colleague of mine called it smartilizers, fertilizers that can be gradually supplied the nutrients and not all immediately to enhance microbial activity, recycle. When you're taking this into account, so that's the way to go. I would say that farmers here, and eventually the practice, is probably the most efficient approach. They're applying manure roughly every 3 years. It's an excellent source of phosphorus. It significantly reduced the demand, but it's there because the manure is still there and it's cheap. If we'll use manure for biogas, then we'll have to shift to more synthetic fertilizers. This should be taken into account. Another very efficient way, here in Israel, we use a lot of treated wastewater. This treated wastewater contains considerable amount of phosphorus. It's cheap. To me, it's very green. It's less than cheap. The synthetic waste there, so the wastewater or the treated wastewater is cheaper than fresh water, of course, and we are all limited. We have limited amount of water, and it contains phosphorus. So it's a win-win. It's the most. You can see the cycle. You eat the apple, you extract the phosphorus into the toilet, and it being treated and go back safely into the field. That's the cycle. We did it out of necessity, not because of recycling, because we didn't have enough water for irrigation. But that's an excellent way to save phosphorus.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. So yes, while synthetic phosphorus remains so cheap, it's just always going to be the go-to, unless you're living near a water treatment plant in Australia. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, or a house with a septic tank like I have. Yes. Just
thank you.
One more question, last one, just about your research life cycle, if I may, because I've heard quite a few agricultural talks, but I want to understand how your mode of operation as an agricultural researcher is. So you go from idea, experiment, analysis, results, idea, but you probably do things in parallel. So how do you kind of manage these? You know what I mean? The pipeline of ideas.
Yeah. The thing with research, and it always, I can give many examples, that you ask a question, you come with idea, you start digging, and you find another 5 questions. So this is what happens to me all the time. I've started working with polyphosphate because we had the idea that it will act as a slow release fertilizer and supply the phosphorus and will be, and indeed we found this is what it does. But we also found that it acts as a chelate for metals. So it supplies more iron and it supplies more calcium. And now we have 3 or 4 projects that are working on, can we use this fertilizer not only as a source of phosphorus, but also as a way to increase the uptake of these very expensive nutrients like iron, zinc. Can we increase the nutritional values of our food? When you go in developing countries where they eat mostly rice and maize and wheat, so it's very poor. We need more zinc, we need more manganese, we need more iron in the grain. We can increase it by roughly 20%. And now it brings another question, because polyphosphate is not, so you see what I'm meaning? We have so many questions. So what's the optimal chain length? What's the best timing? Can plant respond differently? And then we start to see that plants actually produce enzymes that were never known before that can degrade polyphosphate. So that's another project that we have. And I have a PhD student working on that. So the more you dig, I almost never find answers. You just find more questions, and it takes you to different directions. And that's what's fun with what I'm doing. One of the things.
Sounds wonderful. Yes, well, thanks a lot, and thanks for sharing your passion and your knowledge. I'm sure others will follow the video, and if anybody wants to get in touch with Dr. Ran Erel from Volcanic Institute Israel for joint research collaboration or just to discuss or pick his brains, please do. Thanks a lot, Toda Rabah, and
Thanks.
goodbye. Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom. Toda.